Another week in Shadowlands has ended, and another week in Shadowlands has started. There are some new things to talk about. We have a new week of affixes in Mythic Plus. We have another round of Soulbinds completing their 3 in its entirety, with some more options, some more choices for your spec to go for in these Soulbinds, and then some rewards available for you as you're reaching Renown rank 32. Now let's start with the main point of the week, which is the new set of affixes for Mythic Plus, which is going to be Tyrannical, Bursting, Explosive, and Spiteful, of course. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago during the awful Tyrannical, Bolstering, and Necrotic, this would have been the start of a more laid-back series of resets. As you can see here, we will be going from Inspiring and Storming, which was rather chill with Fortified, to Bursting and Explosive, which is also okay in Tyrannical. Next week is going to be Fortified, Sanguine, and Grievous, which is also acceptable. And Tyrannical, Raging, and Quaking is also nice. So from here, we are basically getting a month worth of Mythic Plus, which is going to be rather fine. Now, specifically to this week, with Bursting and Explosive, Explosive, as usual, can technically, theoretically be a 0 damage affix, and Bursting, after being nerfed from the amount of damage it does, number one, and the fact that it's a magic debuff, meaning it can be dispelled, the threat of Bursting has been limited severely compared to BFA, compared to the first part of BFA, up until the time it was changed. So it is a much more manageable week. This is going to be a particularly interesting week, because this is the first week we will have to deal with the nerfed Tyrannical. Tyrannical going from 40% bonus HP on bosses down to 30%, and this is also the week following another round of nerfs to several dungeons, which we covered in the last video. And also, more importantly, a bunch of these main changes were to bosses. We've got Akar, we've got Zayexa, we've got Zav the Unfallen, we've got the last boss in Necrotic Wake. So many changes to bosses in a Tyrannical week we are getting. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly how impactful they have been. We're going to go over the progression in this week in Mythic Plus in a few days. But for now, let's talk about what actually changed this week. This week, what changed is that you're getting 4 more Soulbinds to be fully complete. You're getting Draven for Venthyr, you're getting Mikanikos for Kyrian, you're getting Korayn for Nightfall, and you're getting Heirmir for Necrolord. Now let's get the bad one out of the way, which is Mikanikos. So Mikanikos is the one that gets you to the full complete Soulbind at Renown 31. Mikanikos opens up for you 3 options, one of which is garbage, Soulsteel Clamps. As usual, as it often happens, as you can see, this is the passive you can get after a Potency Conduit, meaning it's going to be a bad one. 5 seconds of standing still, the stun and incapacitate duration is reduced by 30%. This is not particularly interesting or powerful either way. So if you are a spec with a very powerful Potency Conduit and you do want a second Potency Conduit, Mikanikos is going to be a pretty bad one to go for because of this passive you get after a Potency Conduit. His niche, his cute little options are the other 2. Hammer of Genesis and the Sparkling Drift Globe Core. The SDC, because it's way too long to pronounce, the SDC is actually interesting for tanks. When you get below 35% health, you stun nearby enemies for 3 seconds. Now, it's kind of cool, but it's very unreliable. It doesn't really follow a set rotation of stuns with your party, and it's also not very reliable to actually make happen. You would have to drop pretty low for this to work, except if you are in a pre-made group with a 600 IQ healer who tracks the cooldown of your passive and lets you get low to proc a stun, that would be a pretty galaxy brain play. The real only interesting one for your DPSers and even healers and even tanks is the Hammer of Genesis, because this is similar to Korayn, what you're going to be seeing soon with the critical strike chance. This is just a better version of what Necrolords unlock. You heard me complain about the Gnashing Chompers of Emani, which can give you 3% haste stacking up 5 times, but only after an enemy dies. This one doesn't even do that. This one gives you 3% haste per enemy hit the first time, which means as you pull a new pack, as long as there are at least 5 enemies in the group, you get 15% haste for 10 seconds, which is significant. This is obviously very powerful in Mythic Plus. It is one of the higher, depending on your spec, it is the highest or one of the highest passives you can go for in Mythic Plus in terms of damage. It is good. It can be good for specs that can focus on haste and gain some pretty good benefits from haste. Windwalker Monk doesn't get that many, as most Windwalker Monks are Kyrian. Vengeance Demon Hunter is pretty nice with haste, but more importantly, this one is very good for Retribution, Protection, and Holy Paladins, particularly given their play rates as a Kyrian, Holy Paladins and Red Paladins are doing very well with haste. So this is a pretty nice possibility for them. They have also a very easy way to actually hit them all with Consecration. All specs of Paladin have Consecration at their disposal. What is also very good, I mean, it's not something you need to be proud of, but Holy Paladin, Prot Paladin, Red Paladin don't have a super powerful second potency conduit that they would want to use rather than gaining this passive slot. After the several nerfs to the couple of very powerful potency conduits for Paladin, this one right here, the Hammer of Genesis, would beat them. Same for Holy Paladin and the effectiveness of their potency. So you could go for this one, this passive, foregoing a second potency conduit. The problem is that Mikanikos has a very poor starting passive, a power passive, the first one, Bronze Call to Action. It is very weak compared to the counterparts for Kyrian, which is Valiant Strikes for Clea and Combat Meditation for Pelagos. So even with this Hammer of Genesis, it might happen that more Paladins, Red and Holy more likely are going to be playing Mikanikos just because of this passive, but it seems unlikely. Now after Kyrian we go to the second worst, which is Draven. Draven being Venthyr, there are not many Venthyr specs that are going to be benefiting from this one. In fact, there are barely any. The damage buffs that Draven can give you are not very interesting, they're not very powerful. The more important ones are the tank-related ones. You do have a good amount of blood decays playing as Venthyr, so they can benefit from this. There is also a small but acceptable amount of protection paladins playing with Venthyr. So Draven can offer you three options, one of which is useless, superior tactics. The cool ones are built for war and hold your ground. Hold your ground is particularly interesting because it comes after a potency conduit. So after you take your potency conduit, you can still benefit from this. Standing still for 4 seconds gives you 10% more stamina and 4% increased healing done. This is obviously particularly good for a blood decay, whose main shtick is healing. This can be particularly good and effective for tanks, not so much for damage dealers, but then again, there aren't really that many damage dealers going Venthyr anyways, and if they did, they would have to go for Built for War, which is a passable, it's a serviceable passive, but nothing special, nothing great. It's not what is going to make this Soulbind particularly powerful compared to others. Now, the two more awaited unlocks are going to be Heirmir and Korayn. The reason why Heirmir is awaited is because it is the only Necrolord Soulbind with a half-decent passive that you can get at the end. The one that you can get at the end is Heirmir's Arsenal Marrow Gemstone. The other two are pathetic, I don't even want to read them. This one is the only one that's decent. After landing 10 crits, you gain increased crit. This is alright. It's alright for Elemental Shamans, of course, because they can guarantee their crits with Lava Bursts, so they can get this up rather quickly. It's also pretty good for Restoration Shamans because they do have a, focus on critical strike chance, so they want to go for this. It's going to be pretty effective. It's not particularly good for Necrolord Unholy Decays. The other more popular spec going Necrolord is, after Restoration and Elemental Shaman, is Shadow Priest and Unholy. Unfortunately, for Shadow Priest and Unholy, you are in the situation where you do actually have a second potency conduit that can be stronger than this passive, because Unholy Death Knights have Convocation of the Dead, and they have Eternal Hunger, which can beat this passive, and Shadow Priests have Haunting Apparitions and Dissonant Echoes that can both beat this passive in damage, particularly even more so in AoE, so in Mythic Plus, in multi-target. So not particularly relevant for Shadow Priest and Unholy Decay. They will have to choose likely for a passive damage boost rather than a second potency conduit, but it is more relevant for the Shamans, basically, Resto and Elemental. Now on to the last one. Of course, not much needs to be said on the matter of Korayn being the strongest of these Soulbinds and being Night Fae. So, yet again, Night Fae as the strongest Soulbind of the 4 Covenants. Korayn offers you 3 choices which are embarrassing in how powerful they are. So, to give you, to put things in perspective, to make you understand, we're going to go over and be quiet and just show you head-to-head the comparisons of the choices between Heirmir and Korayn. Here we go. You see, that's what I mean. Not much needs to be said. You can go for Face Your Foes and Hold the Line as a more defensive pick, and then you can go for First Strike as the money shot, the super powerful passive. Face Your Foes is particularly, I would say, broken because it comes after, again, a Potency Conduit. Much like Draven, which has a pretty decent defensive passive after a Potency Conduit, Korayn can do the same. So if you're a Night Fae tank, which is, for example, Guardian Druid, you can go for a second Potency Conduit, and then you can still benefit from Face Your Foes, which most of the time is going to mean 3% less damage taken, basically. But of course, the real strong one is First Strike. Damaging an enemy before they damage you increases your chance to crit by 25%. Now, this is sort of less powerful than it looks like. So the four main Night Fae DPSers are going to be Balance Druid, Marksmanship Hunter, Fire Mage, and Affliction Warlock. They are the big brunt of the picks. Technically, as well, we can put Feral Druid in the mix. The problem when it comes to these specs in particular is that, for example, Fire Mage doesn't just have one Potency Conduit that is better than First Strike. They don't just have two Potency Conduits that are better than First Strike. They have three Potency Conduits they can choose from that beat First Strike. Obviously, the problem with Fire Mage is that whenever they combust, First Strike is useless because they already guarantee critting, so First Strike doesn't gain that much value. Affliction, on the other hand, does gain quite a lot of value from First Strike compared to the other options they can go for, as well as their Potency Conduits they can go for. And Marksmanship Hunter is the other one of the specs that is going to have a significant bump due to their front-loaded burst they can have. Balanced Druid, which is what, the other big option for Night Fae, as well as Feral, won't gain as much. Mostly because, and this is like a first world problem, Nia, the other option for Night Fae, is so powerful between the Grove Invigoration Mastery buff and the Nia's tools they can go for that they don't even need to go for Korayn anyways. That being said, it still is the strongest of these Soulbind options. The more encompassing passives, you can go for a pick, for a defensive pick, for a tank, or an offensive pick if you want some more damage, and you happen to have not very powerful Potency Conduits. You can just get this passive First Strike and bail yourself out. It's very, very competitive. Now, on to the other things you can do with this rank 32 in your Renown. Well, you can buy your Recolor Transmog set. I won't go in detail in this rant because it's been pointed out multiple times already. This is the Covenant armor set you can get with Anima and Grateful Offerings. Grateful Offerings is essentially you being a nice guy, using your Anima conductors, spawning the chest, the event, or the rare you have to kill, and you get these currency pieces. And then, of course, Anima. If you want a full set, you have to dump 25,500 Anima, as well as grind 195 Grateful Offerings, all to get just a slight recolor in the tint of this armor set. That's all I'm gonna say. That's all there is to it. And this is pretty much all of the new things happening this week for the normal version of the game, because as you might know, we do now have the 9.0.5 PTR build live. So in the PTR, we are starting to see the first of the changes that Blizzard is addressing for the next patch, and we're going to go over them in another dedicated video, so stay tuned for that. See you guys soon, very likely more soon than tomorrow, sooner than usual, I expect, given this sudden burst of news. And in the meantime, let's go and read all of the PTR changes.